Welcome to the Star Trek Universe panel. If you guys have not seen Star Trek over the last year with Picard, Lower Decks, as well as Discovery, or any of the other Star Trek, you're going to be spoiled. If you guys we got a great panel to talk to about Star Trek. So, hello everybody, and let's talk about the last 55 years of Star Trek. Where would you guys like to start? You got anything specific? I know some of you want to start talking about Picard and lower decks as well as Discovery. So we can start there if you want.
Perhaps we should begin by introducing ourselves, Tony.
We can. I am Tony.
Okay. Well, I brought it up, so I'm Walter Hunt. I'm a science fiction, historical fiction writer, as your author guest of honor a few years ago. Most recent books are City by the Bay, which is about Russian California, and 1636 novel with Eric Flint, The Atlantic Encounter. And I'm glad to be here at MarsCon again. Thank you.
I'm Joan Marie Verba, and I have been a Star Trek fan since 1966. And I did want to make a comment about Star Trek, this being the 55th year of Star Trek. Back in the day, I want to emphasize to the people who have later joined the Star Trek fandom, welcome, thank you, that the future of Star Trek was by no means inevitable. And in the early 1970s, we were pessimistic about whether it would coming back. It came back because, two things. First of all, letter campaigns, the fans organized and did a constant letter campaign to Star Trek until the 1979 movie, which made enough money that they decided to go ahead with everything else. And that is why Star Trek is now the franchise, and there have been 800 Star Trek episodes, somebody counted, since 1966, and the way it goes. But it was by no means guaranteed. It was that, and the other thing was that the popularity of Star Wars made Paramount take another look at Star Trek and say, hey, if science fiction is popular, let's put Star Trek back in somehow. So just wanted to make that point. And I am, my 1971 self would have been just overjoyed to know that in the year 2021, that's not only Star Trek was still around, but that there were 5 series that were in active production and development.
My 1971 self would be thrilled to find out that there was a 2021 self.
That too.
I'll go next. Yeah. I'm Isabel Schechter. I have been a fan for since being a child. I've been involved in fandom for about 25 years. I write essays on race and representation, mostly in the genre. And I recently edited a nonfiction anthology, mostly about fans talking about, it's called Bridges and Boundaries, and it's about fans and how fandom has enabled them to either create or tear down boundaries, and then of course build bridges to other fans and to other communities. And so I'm really excited to be here. I think that Star Trek is definitely a community that has erected boundaries between people. You know, what side are you on? Are you on the original series? Are you on New Trek? And then it also has helped build bridges. You know, we have a primary generation, I'm going to call it, who grew up with the original series. And then we have this new generation of folks that came in with the next generation. And we now have this new generation that has come in with Discovery and Picard and Lower Decks and all of that. And so I think that this is a really great, phenomenon.
I'm hello everybody. I'm Tiernan Cisco. I'm a author to some sci-fi books and things like that. But more importantly, the Trek. I am the one of the co-founders and the chief question writer for TC Trek Trivia, which for the past almost 8 years now, come August, is still, as far as we know, the only recurring pub trivia. Although now we're more Zoom trivia these past 13 months, dedicated solely to all things Star Trek. Lifelong Trekkie. The first movie I remember seeing in theaters was Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. My parents have told me that the first movie I actually saw in theaters was Return of the Jedi, but we're just going to ignore that because I don't remember that. I remember watching Spock on the Genesis planet and Christopher Lloyd as Captain Cruise, and that just triggered a lifelong I'll say fascination because obsession has negative connotations, but love Trek. And to Joan's point, I remember the ebb and flow because there was this kind of beautiful part right in the early mid 90s where we had TNG and DS9 on air. And then we also had the TNG films coming out in theaters. So it felt like Trek is everywhere. And then, of course, after Enterprise's fourth season, it kind of disappeared again, kind of went underground. And then in '09, Abrams brought us the Kelvinverse, and then we got Discovery, and then Short Treks, and then Lower Decks, and then Picard, and then we've got the Nickelodeon series is going to be launching. Prodigy's coming, and all these other. So it's kind of like I love watching the ebb and flow because all Trek is good Trek. No Trek is better than any other Trek as long as it's Trek. We're good to go, and it's just I just love that we're on the crest. We're in like I don't know the term like bull bear market. That's fancy smart folks talk. But we're in whichever one of those is good. That's where we're at right now for Trek. So it's good times to be a super Trekkie nerd like myself.
I couldn't agree more. It's been 26 years for me for being a Star Trek fan. I came in on Star Trek Voyager one night when my dad was flipping through the channels, and we watched Voyager together and became a huge fan of that. And I'm looking forward to seeing the documentary that's coming out next year, which we'll probably get into maybe if we have the time. And I probably am one of the few who have actually seen everything. But I still love Voyager, and I am looking forward to seeing Kate McGrew come back for Prodigies. So to see her continuing story as Janeway. But yeah, I've seen over 800 episodes now, and all of the movies. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I've been a huge Star Trek fan, trying to hit the conventions, meet some of the actors, and it's been a wonderful experience in my life. Star Trek is my home for science fiction, so it is what I truly love. So where do you guys want to start? Do you want to start with Picard or Discovery or Lower Decks?
I have a question about Picard, or that I wanted to bounce off the panel if I could, because I haven't seen a lot of discussion about it, and we have warned the audience that there are going to be spoilers for Picard. So if you don't want to be spoiled for Picard, just drop out for the next few minutes. At the end, when they put Picard in an artificial body, I wondered how the rest of the panel felt about that. I read the commentary by the producers after watching the episode, and they explained why they felt this was a development that was signaled by everything that had become before. I am not so sure that it was. I'm not so sure as to how that's going to impact. I guess we'll find out when we see the next production of Picard. But I wondered how the other panelists felt about that.
It's a really interesting point. I think that John Luke probably would have never opted to be turned into a machine because he's already been one, and we saw him relive those nightmares through him being a Borg and being back on a cube. And I think even his interaction with Seven and Hugh again really still bothers him. I think it still haunts him. I think if he had the choice, I don't know if he really did have the choice. I think he was just kind of forced into this is what we're going to do because after having an artificial heart, the man's what, in his 90s, he's like 92, 93 now.
Well, sure, if you're going to have a 90-year-old action hero, you have to make sure that he's relatively invulnerable.
Right.
it, I think you're. I think Joan's comment about it being inevitable as a result of all of the, or I tend to agree with the thing that Joan is complaining about, that it is, there is a certain inevitability to it. The whole series kind of set up the idea that he was vulnerable to this affliction that was going to kill him, and his doctor says, "Don't go out there, you'll die," and everybody says, "Don't do this or that, you'll die." And now they've set it up so that he can be an elderly action hero, and now they've dispensed with that plot twist, and they can move on to whatever's in season 2.
So it undermined the character. All
Okay.
Trek is good Trek, but I thought that was a horrible decision on part of the writers because I saw it leading up. I had the opposite impression as the producers did. I was like, oh, this is Picard's swan song. This is going to end with a lot of tears. And then I thought, again, based on nothing, just personal fan, maybe desire, that Picard was going to die, and then they would like rechristen the Serena as like the USS Picard, and that's how the series would continue. But as far as the season, that the character of Jean-Luc, I mean, every great character in fiction and nonfiction really, but in fiction, because we get to make those stories, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. A journey isn't a journey if it doesn't stop. It just keeps going. And I thought, like, Kirk's ending wasn't super great, but he got an ending. Like Cisco's ending wasn't great, but he got an ending. Janeway doesn't have an ending because her story is still waiting to be told. And the way that, just again, in my opinion, the way that the one season we have so far of Picard played out, it felt like, okay, this is the end. This is the final chapter of this iconic Starfleet captain. And it felt like it was a disservice to not actually let it be the ending. It felt cheap. That was my initial reaction. Maybe on like the third or fourth rewatch, I'll come around, or maybe the second season really has some cool takes on it. I'll change that. But right now, it still just doesn't sit well, both in universe and out of universe. Like out of universe, it's like, all right, this is great, but as awesome as Sir Patrick Stewart is, he doesn't have a synth body, and at some point, that could be an awkward situation, a la Doctor Who, and Will Hartnell as I cross fandoms here. Yeah, I thought it ended fine for the story, but I thought that there were better options that they could have taken.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I don't think that it was in keeping with the character. I don't think it was in keeping with the history of the character. Um, and it was interesting how it was a total it was the exact opposite of what was going on with Data. Data had this life, and he realized, I've done this, it's been enough time, and it's okay for me to go now. And then you have Picard, who has lived a very rich, full, long life. And it's not a tragedy. It would not be a tragedy if he died. That is what happens to people. They die. And so, as a fan, I was really excited to see this show, like, ooh, there's more about Picard. Yay. But then they did this thing to him, and I thought, well, that's wrong. Like, if they had not given him this disease and just put him out there, I would have been okay with this being a show about him being a 90-year-old action hero, right? But when they did that to him, I thought that was cheating. I thought that was cheating. They wanted to have a show so that, you always want to make money. Always want to have a property out there. And I think that that's what they did. They wanted to have a show. They wanted to have a show that was going to be popular. Everybody loves Jean-Luc, right? And so, of course, we're all going to watch a show about him, which means you can't have a 90-year-old action hero because nobody will believe that. So how do we make him not be a 90-year-old action hero while still making him a 90-year-old action hero?
But in fact, I'm sorry.
So I absolutely agree with you. I don't think it was in keeping with the character. I don't think that if you really think about who he was, that he would have picked this.
But that gives him a season 2 motivation. Yes, he's probably opposed to the idea of how he's been recreated, but in fact, Jean-Luc has left things undone. He has ghosts in his past, things like the whole Mars thing. I think he feels like he didn't finish things that he needed to finish. He didn't get things accomplished. There's still all this stuff going on in Starfleet. So this is a way for him to accomplish things. and he has to figure out how to come to terms with it. That's season 2 is Picard coming to terms with being a machine. All the Borg things and all that. I think there's some merit in making that a plot thing. Now Picard has to be the tortured 90-year-old action hero. How Shakespearean.
I mean, to that point, that's part of being human, is that you have unfinished business. That's what makes the finite lifespan so critical, is that you only have a set amount of time. If you're lucky, you don't know how much time that is, so you try and do what you can with the time that you have. And by removing that element, then we kind of get, like, your idea, like, I hope you're right that they do address it head on in season 2, but to do it properly, that makes kind of for a much darker characterization of Picard than we've ever, or any Starfleet character, because he's really saying, like, you know what, I got to cheat death. So I mean, we get almost like a Dorian Gray sort of thing. Like, do we get to watch Picard become like this apathetic immortal that's just sort of floating around the galaxy righting wrongs, which is not a bad premise, saying it out loud, but at the same time, do we as Trekkies, is that Jean-Luc, is that Picard, is that Star Trek? When Star Trek's all about the best that humanity can be, we say, well, you know what the best thing humanity can do is stop being human. And then
easy.
And I think if we look at Kirk, I mean, Kirk died, right? He died on screen. I mean, it was tragic. I wouldn't even say it was tragic, right? Like, it was a fitting death, right? He went out doing the thing that he loved. He saved people. Like, that was a good death, right? Today is a good day to die, right? Well, he died in a great way to die. And as much as we miss him, and as much as we may have wanted him to go on, we recognize that that was a legitimate death. And I don't get that same feeling that we were willing to have a legitimate death. So
maybe
do we love Kirk more than we love Jean-Luc?
Spock. We brought Spock back. We killed Spock in the most dramatic, the most tearful way possible.
Yes.
And boy, we brought him back, didn't we?
But we earned it. We let him die and be dead. And then we didn't just bring him back like in that same, like, the coda of Star Trek 2. We had a whole film, technically a trilogy, because Spock didn't really become Spock again until Star Trek 5.
Right, because he has to come to terms. Your name is Jim. You are my friend. Yeah,
it's like.
So Picard has to deal with the compressed nature of all this. Is by the magic of waving hands, push the button and it goes. He gets to come back, and now the question, it's the Boat of Theseus question: is he still Picard, or is he something else? Is he a memory of Picard? This is great. I mean, if anybody can pull this off, it's Patrick Stewart.
It will be interesting because with Guinan coming back, maybe that's where the discussion will be, because she's been around for thousands of years, possibly, and maybe they will have a heart to heart. And with the rumor of even John Delancey returning to Picard too, maybe Picard and Q will finally find peace together or something, or maybe maybe Q will undo Picard as a machine.
Don't get me started on Q. We done yet? Are we done yet?
With Q?
With Q? No, because Q's in lower decks.
Q's great.
No, he's not.
He's so freaking annoying. He's so annoying.
Yeah, it's the Q and Lwaxana Troi are the parts of Next Generation I despise the most. So
even when done well, like Tapestry.
No, it didn't do it for me.
I love Lwaxana. I loved her.
Oh, no.
I thought Lwaxana was done well when they brought her over to DS9.
Yes.
And they kind of gave her space to be more than just like, this is a humorous side character to this role. It's like, no, this is an actual character that's going to have their own mini arc. But Q, I felt like Q was just overused, kind of like the Borg. Like, I loved the Borg when they were first introduced, and then I felt they got a little 80s slasher movie sequel with it, where, 80s slasher movies, the first one, like a lot of horror fans, like the first one's great because they build up suspense. You don't see the monster right away. It's actually like kind of ominous. And like that first introduction of the Borg was intense. And then we kind of got a lot of them throughout TNG, and then we got a whole lot of them through Voyager. We got almost too much, where it kind of took away that mystique, and they're not scary anymore. They're sort of like, oh, it's just another species. They're as scary, quote unquote, as like Klingons or Romulans, which is not scary. They're just adversarial. And the same thing with Q. Q was an interesting figure in Encounter at Farpoint. And then he'd pop up and have a couple interesting episodes, especially, and I think it was Tapestry, I might be getting the episode wrong, but where he kind of sends Jean-Luc back, where he doesn't get the artificial heart after being stabbed with a Nausicaan, and he kind of sees what his life, sort of like It's a Wonderful Life, but like Star Trek edition. That was a really interesting for us. Like, if you're non-corporeal and you don't have the human perception of time, well, what does that look like, and how can you do stuff with it? There is so much possibility, but then we just kept getting Q. And the writers were like, okay, well, John Delancey's funny, so let's make Q funny. And then the Continuum, which should be like the greatest scientific discovery in the history of reality, is just played as like, oh, they're these sort of like trickster gods, almost like Greek mythology. It's just like, wait, so you're saying that these life forms out there that live forever, are all powerful, omnipresent, omnipotent? That should be a much bigger deal than it's treated in most of the Star Trek episodes.
Speaking of overuse aliens, like they did with the Borg, when we get to Discovery, the lack of Klingons, the lack of Ferengis, and some of the other major species that we're used to, they decided to pull back on and bring more minor characters and species in. So that's why we got more of the Orions, more of the Andorians. And a lot of people were wondering, why haven't we seen the Klingon in Discovery? Why don't we see the Ferengis in Discovery being part of the black market? And basically, from what I understand, it was because the production thought they were overused and wanted to use lesser known. So with new makeup artists, they updated a lot of how they did the Orions and how the makeup was applied from when we first saw them in the original series, to just slightly changing the Cardassians who were in the background of Discovery, as well as Morn species and some of the others as well. So I think we're going to slowly see the ones that we know a lot about come back as a lesser role, and the ones we know less about see more of a major role, along with introducing new species.
Sure. Well,
Do you
Saru.
think that has? Go ahead.
No, please. Saru is a very interesting alien that assumes a major role, and of course he's brand new. So that I'm all for that. Please, Isabel. I'm sorry to interrupt
Do
you.
you think that some of the reasoning, not necessarily the actual, production reasoning, but within the story, could that be a reflection of the burn, right? So those who had that technology suffered the most, right? So like if you take away electricity from people who have electricity, they're screwed because they don't have any other way to work. Whereas if you take electricity from people who didn't have it and who have been functioning without it, they're going to do much better after the death of electricity because they've already had a stable government, a stable society, a whatever. And so we are now seeing other people who may not have been or may not have played such a large part in the Federation precisely because they didn't have warp technology or those kinds of things. How much of that do you think could be put into the story and not just be a production issue?
I think our next season of Discovery 4 is going to be a lot like what Kirk and Christopher is doing, and it's reconnecting the what once was the Federation and discovering strange new worlds and reconnecting the old time people and species that we know, if they want to come back. They're going to have that option.
I got to say, 900 years is a very long time.
Mhm.
And I think we are glossing over just how different the universe should be in 900 years than it actually is. We science fiction writers traditionally have no idea how that all works. We're writing in 1632 in the Ring of Fire universe with Eric Flint, writing in the 17th century, makes us realize just how much has changed and how much is the same. And my concern with Discovery is that that there are difficulties with projecting 900 years in the future. It's just like starting a new story. What I'm more interested in is the storytelling within the constraints of Discovery, not the setting. And I don't care whether I see the Ferengi or not. I don't care whether I see new aliens or not. I'm interested in making sure the story is good and that it's Star Trek-y, and it is. So I'm happy with it.
Do you guys think I forget the character's name, but the one who interrogated Giorgio, the one with the glasses, do you think he is the UFP president?
Oh, wasn't he canonically? He's Section 31.
He never confirmed that.
Mm,
Yeah, it's unclear to me what he is. He's an AI, isn't he?
That's what I thought.
But whether he's
That,
based,
that was, yeah, that was my impression as well. He was an AI.
that's what I thought too. Well, there you go.
Well, I do know that the actor who plays him is coming back for season 4, and he doesn't fully understand the character yet. He doesn't know what is going to happen with him. Which is now in production, season 4 of Discovery.
I do hope,
Yay.
to Isabel's point, that that's the role that they take, that they do kind of take into account not just, obviously it's building off of TOS and TAS really heavily, and TNG to some extent, but all of Trek, because now that we're so far ahead. And so with that in mind, thinking of like, all right, if there's a species who has been reliant upon warp travel, of course, losing that capability is going to be devastating. But if there wasn't, what does that mean? So really, the Hirogen, who are already a nomadic species, already accustomed to traveling like massive distances, and who have just possibly lost the capability for all their, holographic prey to keep them from hunting other species, they could be a really interesting big bad. Not to mention the Tellarites, who have always gotten the short end of the stick. They're always just sort of like that trivia question. It's like, what 4 species started the Federation? It's like humans, Vulcans, Andorians, and all the dog face ones. Yeah, they never get any love. So love to see some more like Orions are great, Andorians are great, but really Andorians got their love in Enterprise. We had some pretty heavy, like Strawn was a great character. Orions have kind of been a constant, like to the point it's like apocryphal. It's like Kirk and the green-skinned sleepover friends.
That girl.
I was like, would love to see some Tellarite action, because it's like, so this species was important enough to be one of the 4 pivotal pillars of the UFP, but haven't really done anything for going on 9 series, like in a major way. Like they kind of pop up here and there. We had a little bit of Tellarite action in Lower Decks. That was kind of fun, but it's always like that. They just pop up, they do a little thing, and they disappear. Like, I want to, like, give me some Tellarite love. Like, what's going on with these folks?
Not
Yeah,
hot towel right now.
Yeah, that would be nice. I'd love to see more Tellarites. I am, but in talking about the original Federation species, I do love that they have Linus the Saurian on Discovery. He's a recurring character, if not even if he's not a major character.
Yeah, he's turned into like the comic relief
Yeah.
a lot. I do enjoy him. I do also, going off of that, is to the new technology they introduced with the Tricom badge, with the reprogrammable matter, and just him playing around with the Tricom. I think it was a really great idea on the prop makers to combine 3 legendary props into one thing. And then, of course, we have something like reprogrammable matter, but not to the extent that they used in that. The other thing that I was really happy with Discovery was they didn't make the Admiral a villain like we've seen in so many past episodes and movies. and I hope they don't make him into a villain. Outside of Picard and Janeway and a couple others, admirals, a lot of them turn out to be the villain of the story, and I'm hoping Discovery doesn't go that route with what's coming up. But I also need to see Grudge sitting in the captain's chair at one point because she's queen and she belongs there.
I think what you bring up, I'm sorry, what you bring up about being evil. I love Giorgio. This
she's great.
this whole thing about, when she first came on, we loved her, right? And as a woman of color, as a woman and as a woman of color, I was just like, wait, I'm sorry. There's a series where the two main characters are women of color. I am there. Like, let me just clear my calendar right now for the rest of my life because I am watching this show. And I love the actress, right? And so she dies. I'm like, what is that? What is that? You sucked me in, right? Like, and then she comes back and she's evil, and there's this whole universe. And there's that moment of like, oh, are we gonna have the other universe where like all we do is, have the black belt or whatever, and we know it's the bad guys because they have a beard. But we have this like full, rich other universe. And Giorgio is a real person, and she's a bitch, and she's horrible, and she's mean and nasty. And it comes naturally to her. It's not like this is a reaction to anything. Like, that's who she is. She is the emperor. And you don't get to be the emperor by being a nice person. Yet she is part of the crew, and she is part of the family. And we all understand that she's evil and she's on our side. And so we're really grateful. And so we allow an evil person on our team. And I think that dynamic is fascinating because Trek has gotten darker and darker and darker with each show. And I think that this is like the height of darkness.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah, I going off of Giorgio and her conclusion on Discovery, I actually found those two-part episodes to be the weakest episodes of the season. I think the writers wanted to make her less evil in the end before transferring her to her own series for Section 31. So especially in part one, where she's learning all of the stuff about you have to be nicer, I don't think that really felt like her. And I think they were trying to pull her back to the non-mirror Giorgio. Maybe we'll get more villainy stuff through her for Section 31, and maybe it was all an act to please the Guardian. But who knows? I was kind of disappointed in how they handled her exit from Discovery, and I hope they tune up the more evilness of whenever they decide to launch Section 31.
So she's coming back in that?
Yes, she's starring in Section 31.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because I thought that her evolution from a writing perspective made her much more compelling because like it took away that black hat mustache twirl that we usually get from the mirror universe. Like I love DS9 as a series, but their mirror universe episodes were borderline ridiculous because the characterizations were so over the top. It's like, because in universe, in order for the Terran Empire or the Kardashian Clan Alliance or any of these groups to really function, there does have to be some give and take. Like it can't just be everyone's a murderous psychopath, everyone's sociopathically trying to kill everyone else, because that you can't sustain a society in that way, let alone sustain an empire that's going to be functional enough to dominate other societies.
Right.
So Lorca, I thought, was an interesting picture in the first season Discovery, where it's like, oh, okay, so he's from the mirror universe, but he's crafty, and he wasn't really well developed. It was just more like kind of like if Han Solo was mean, like because he was sexy, but he was kind of snarky, but he was like a bad guy, but he wasn't that bad, and so they needed him to be bad, and then they just kill him. And it's like, all right, that was okay. There was little shades there, but Giorgio, we finally got to spend some real time with the Terran from the mirror universe, And so it wasn't just like, well, I'm evil because all the men in this world have goatees. It was like, this is how our society, and we got a lot of that when she was kind of talking to Burnham, or like Prime Universe Burnham, about these are the necessities. Like, you can't be weak. This is what you have to do. So it becomes less evil and more like a product of that sort of nature nurture argument, where it's like UFP Prime Universe sees thing as, we can win more flies with honey, whereas Terrans are, depending on your own personal point of view, either more pragmatic or more pessimistic or cynical. But they're like, honey's not where it's at. We get the sticks, we get the fly strips. That's how we catch the flies. So it's almost like this sort of mirror. Ha! Look at that. It's like a mirrored universe, but like the opposites on the same coin. Like the joke about the Borg and the Federation. Like, the Borg are just more honest about assimilation than the Federation is.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
so
I've had some major issues with Trek throughout the whole time. I mean, I love Trek, but it's incredibly problematic from a colonial standpoint, right? Like, I'm Puerto Rican, and so my people know about colonization, right? And this notion of, civilizing the savages and all of that. Who does the Federation? How is it that the Federation decides that they're better enough than these other societies that they get to determine who joins?
That's the Organians' point, isn't it? That the Federation is not intrinsically, from the Organian standpoint, the Federation is not intrinsically better than the Klingons. They're both the same. They're just different versions of the same. And I agree with Aaron's comment about DS9's version of the Mirror Universe. It's Mirror Universe cosplay. The DS9 guys get to dress in shiny black uniforms and get to be bad. They get to go show off their bad selves, which is just silly. I love the way it was treated in the Mirror Universe in Discovery. Tilly as bad is she's, I think, my favorite Discovery character, and her as evil, especially when the good Tilly has to pretend to be the bad Tilly. Boy, she is terrific at it. It's wonderful.
If you remember Discovery season 1, when Lorca meets Harry Mudd in the Klingon prison,
right?
The Klingon prison detention cell on the Klingon ship. Harry Mudd gives a very telling line. He says, you guys never think about what happens to the little people on the planet while you are going boldly from place to place in the universe. It was something like that. I thought that was a very telling line.
Yeah, I also found it interesting too that Discovery recognized the Kelvin timeline in Giorgio's departure as well from the newspaper The Guardian was reading. So it was there. And it is interesting also that not only that Discovery is linking heavily to DS9, they're also doing it to Enterprise. And Lower Decks had a lot of Enterprise references too. And with the rumor of Scott Bakula coming back for Jonathan Archer for Strange New Worlds, will tie in even more, which I think is really a fun idea because it is the 20th anniversary of Enterprise this year. So
can we chat about that?
There is a question in the chat. Do you want to go ahead, Aaron, and then we'll get to the question?
Sure. I was just saying, because you mentioned the Kelvinverse, and so this panel is about all Trek, and I feel like even though every group, as far as I can remember, I remember when TNG launched, and like my parents' generation and Trekkies are like, this isn't real Trek. Like, to the point that I remember the TNG actors were kind of like overlooked at the conventions at that time. And then we had the block of the 23rd century Treks or 24th century Treks. And then people were like, Enterprise is okay, but then they're like, I don't know, DS9 is not real Trek. It's too dark. They don't go anywhere. Voyager's not real Trek. It's this. Enterprise isn't real Trek because of this. And then we got the Kelvinverse films, which again, the same recycled chorus. This isn't real Trek because of X, Y, Z, whatever, which people have said about the 21st century series as well, about Picard and Discovery. And I personally think the Kelvinverse films as a trilogy, they're fantastic. They're good, even Into Darkness. And I know Into Darkness is the one that's like, even like the hardcore all Trek is good Trekkies are sort of like, well, yeah, but Into Darkness kind of, it's like Into Darkness is a fantastic sequel to 09. Like watching 09 and then watching Into Darkness and just those two, like, which is what you're supposed to, I mean, that's the story. That is a fantastic follow-up. And Beyond, I think, is probably the second most underrated Star Trek movie of the 13 pictures that have been released so far.
And we're getting another one from Kelvin Timeline. The rumor has it that some of the writers from Discovery, as well as the guy who wrote the screenplay for Star Trek II, will be writing the next Star Trek Kelvin Timeline movie for Paramount.
I'm just curious what
Before-
the panel what do you all think of the Calvinverse films? Like, what were your takes then? What are your takes now?
I think it was okay. I
Um,
think it was fun. It was nice to see Trek back in the theaters.
Zachary
but,
Quinto was very good. I think. Yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch is no more Khan than Ricardo Montalban was Khan. I mean, I don't. I think that's a softball to Isabel. I think. But I honestly, really, but I like the films. I like the Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Carl Urban dynamic. That's the heart of original Trek, isn't it? I mean, those three guys, and they did a really good job of being those three guys interacting with each other, and the spoof reel is very funny.
So let's get to this question that we have.
Yeah, before we get to the question, I wanted to address a comment before. As being a fan from 1966, there has been pushback on every single Star Trek series after the original. There was negative comment about Next Generation before it started. There was negative feeling about Deep Space Nine before it started. There was negative feeling about Voyager before it started. There was negative feeling about Enterprise before it started. There was negative beef before Discovery. There has been negative pushback from a certain segment of fans for every single Star Trek series that has ever been produced.
True.
Yeah, totally.
So I love this question that we've gotten because for me it relates to DS9, which is the best show ever. So in relation to Star Trek getting more and more dark and how human art mirrors, mimics, or predicts actual life, how does Trek getting more dark make you feel about Earth's future? So I love Deep Space Nine. I think it is the best of the shows. I don't remember if it was last year or this year. That is the year in which the episode where Cisco becomes the revolutionary takes place. There's an episode where he and Dax and Bashir transport to a planet and to Earth, and they accidentally, through some transporter malfunction, the two guys end up on one side of the wall and she ends up on the other side of the wall. And it's very much the haves and the have-nots. And Cisco ends up becoming the revolutionary leader.
Bell.
Right?
Yep.
And so the year and that year, that revolt is the bloodiest revolt, or I don't remember what Cisco calls it, but I think it might have been the bloodiest revolt in Earth's history, right? And that happens today. It was either last year or today. I don't know. COVID, time is meaningless, right? But like when you think about it, I feel like that is one of the things that science fiction does. It predicts the future, or it talks about today and sets it in the future so that we can look at it more analytically. And so looking back now at the science fiction that was looking forward, we can look and say, wow, we thought we'd have transporters, and instead we have homeless, right? Instead of transporters and instead of tricorders, we have people who are dying in the streets because they don't have medical care. Instead of, this utopia where nobody needs money, right? Like in the Next Generation, or in the beginning of Next Generation, we have people who their economy is, their currency is constantly being devalued. Like this is, when I say that Star Trek gets darker and darker, I don't necessarily mean that that's a bad or a different thing. I think it's much more a realistic thing,
Um,
because this
yeah.
utopia that Gene Roddenberry had, it's like, okay, sweetie, I'm sorry, that's totally not realistic. That's just not what's going to happen. That's not what's going to happen.
Can I respond to that,
Yeah.
if I may? Your points are very well taken. The fact that Star Trek has become darker is a reflection of what Star Trek is trying to do in a way that it wasn't trying to do in 1966. It's trying to be more relevant, more topical. It's not trying to be, Law and Order, ripped from the headlines, but it is trying to be more topical. But it was never intended to be dystopic. Star Trek is not by its nature dystopic. We have plenty of dystopic science fiction. God knows we have plenty of it. We've had it for forever. I mean, On the Beach, right? Last Babylon, all kinds of dystopic science fiction about how we screw this up very badly. Star Trek has never tried to do that. However, as it has moved into this more classical frame, it is trying to be more relevant to 2021. In 1966, the closest Star Trek got to being relevant to 1966 is it had an interracial kiss. It talked about it cloaked stories about the Vietnam War into Star Trek episodes, but it was never trying to be topical.
I disagree.
Okay.
Do you remember the episode? Do you remember the episode where the two warring factions?
Yes, let that be your last battlefield.
Oh, the split face guys.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
Right.
yeah, but that was
Well,
but that was
they're black on the right side and we're black on the left side.
sure,
Ooh.
but that was metaphorical.
Oh, I got to jump in. I'm sorry. Just to address the comment, the question in the chat first. One, I don't think Star Trek is any darker. I think Star Trek is as dark as it always has been. I think that the writers are getting more blatant and spoon feeding, because when you look at the old stories, they're using the human characters as the everyman to look at these situations, and then audiences, I'm one of them, myself included, all Trekkies just in general, we didn't get the point, because when you watch an episode like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, the writers are saying, hey, racism is fucking stupid. Pardon my French. Racism is stupid because it's a superfluous, it's a descriptor. You're using these things. And people saw it and said, oh, yeah, it's saying that in America, we shouldn't treat black people different. It's like, no, it's so much more than that. So then you fast forward a couple decades, DS9 does a horrible episode from a writing standpoint. Because again, if you remember, it starts with Sisko reading off the names of the dead in the Dominion War. And then he flashes back into Benny Russell. And he's like, oh, Far Beyond the Stars. And he's like, oh, look, racism's really bad. This is just the 50s. It's not even the future. This is what actually happened. We've got Kira Nerys basically playing DC Fontana. This is what she went through. This is all real stuff. Do you say, you guys get it now? You get it now? People are like, oh, man.
Michael Dorn is Willie Mays. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That DS9 episode was saying about how American racism is pretty bad. It's like, no, you're still, So then by the time we get to Discovery and Picard, they're like, okay, let me make this consequences. When you make considerations from a military or bureaucratic standpoint without considerations for the social or economic or well-being of these species, as they did the first episode of Picard, there are issues, there are consequences. So people are like, man, Star Trek's dark. Star Trek's been saying the same thing since the first episode of the first. Even the Cage was like, yo, how you think matters. It's not a matter of what you do, it's your outlook too. And feel like, man, the Cage is cool. Those aliens, those Telosians, they had butts for heads. That's funny. That's kind of weird. It's like, you're missing, there's so much there. Because again, original Trek, the writers are good now, but we had amazing sci-fi authors that were putting their all into little 30 to 45 to 60-minute stories that Roddenberry would come and poop on. But
it was careful. It was careful, and it was I don't want to say superficial, but it was less in your face. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. We're doing more of the same as we've always done, but we're doing it in more blatant fashion. Where it was always like a metaphorical tale. We were very careful about how it was presented, and I don't know if that was the time, or that was the censors, or that was Roddenberry, or what.
I think part of that is who's being affected, because as a woman of color, there was no subtlety there. I saw that. I saw what they were doing there, right? I totally I was like, and thank you very much for putting that out there. Let's see if the white people catch that.
I was white
And
people, and I was 8, and I didn't catch it. But
exactly, and that's the thing. Like by the time I was 8, I knew about race, and I knew about racism, and I knew about discrimination, and I knew that I was treated differently than other people for absolutely no good reason. And so when I saw the black on the right versus black on the left episode, I was like, yes, right? When I see those episodes, that shit jumped out at me. That was not subtle. That was my life. And so when people say, oh, it was metaphorical, or it was less obvious, or it was less political, right? Political. No, no, it was absolutely in your face if you were the person affected, right? The
okay,
reason that people see it now is because people of color have gotten more vocal about it, right? Or because the times have changed such that it's safe now to be blatant about it. And so I
further.
think that it really is in the eye of the beholder about, has it gotten more blatant?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a fair conclusion. I would go with that. Sure. Well, particularly the last, that um, it's safer now to talk about it. We can do things now that we couldn't do in 1966. We couldn't do things on television in 1960. I mean, the interracial kiss, right? That was such a shocker. And nowadays, I used to discover he has two men kissing. I mean, you couldn't do that in 1966.
You've
Although,
got a non-binary character now.
Yeah, there we go.
right,
Right.
right.
Because All in the Family, I mean, if we're talking about network television, Sammy Davis Jr. and Carol Connor shared a kiss, which was both interracial and same gender, and that was in the 70s. But because of the way it was framed, it didn't get the hullabaloo. I think Star Trek was controversial, not because of like the big moments like that, or political, but because it was a constant thread that every episode you had these fantastic writers bringing these stories, and they were shrouding it in allegory or metaphor.
Allegories.
One, because it's science fiction, and so you kind of have to already, and they continue to do that. I mean, even TNG, when you have stuff like Measure of a Man, when you have the episode with the Binars, they're really talking about heavier topics, but they're like doing it in a fun way to kind of hopefully hook the audience in. Like little black kid growing up in Chicago, it's like I got what they were doing, and I mean, even in TAS, like the Lorelei Signal, that was probably the most feminist piece of television, period. Like screw Charlie's Angels, like the Lorelei Signal, where all the dudes are old and feeble because they can't control the baloney in their slacks, so to speak, and then Uhura takes over, and like that is a fantastic. The animated series, so a lot of people don't see it anyway. But that was a fantastic episode. And as a kid, I was like, oh man, girls are awesome. And then that shaped. Yes, I agree. I think it's definitely eye of the beholder, but I do think Star Trek's been pushing things to the forefront in their time, and then we get to what they were saying because we didn't heed the warning at that time, like the Bell Riots episode. And we're like, oh man, they're so prophetic. And it's like, yeah, they tried to warn us. This isn't something that was going to happen. These were the situations that were happening. Here is an artistic expression saying, oh man, it's kind of wonky in the future if these terrible situations create gross inequities, huh? Right? In the future. And then we're like, oh, that was a cool episode. And then we fast forward 2 decades, like, man, can you believe that they predicted? It's like they weren't predicting. They were just observing and trying to package it in a way that would be palatable.
Yeah, we're getting near the end of our time, and I want to make sure that we talk about Lower Decks if we want to, or any other Star Trek topics that are on any of your minds before we wrap up. And hopefully, all of you guys will join us next year, and hopefully, we'll be in person to do 56 years of Star Trek.
I have a comment about what we've just discussed, and it relates to the question. I was attracted to Star Trek in the first place because of the optimistic view of the future. And I am glad that the current producers are going to are making a determined effort to keep that optimism in there. Yes, there is evil. Yes, there is darkness in the world. Yes, we have to confront it, but we don't have to give into it or become that. And one of the best scenes in Star Trek, as far as I'm concerned, was at the end of the first season of Discovery, when Burnham confronts the admiral, and she says, "We are not going to win this war by genocide. We are not." and you are going to find, we are going to find another way, and we are going to do it, but we are not going to win this war by genocide. And I thought that was fantastic. That was Star Trek. And I am so glad that they put it up there.
Sure. Saru on various occasions in season 3 says we're not going to do this because that's not what the Federation does.
Mhm.
That he believes that even if the Federation is denatured and is declined, that the Federation still means something, and it means something to him. And he's, he's an outlier for the Federation. He's the one. Whatever his race is from Kaminar, he's this one guy, and he's adapting to the fact that he's alone, and he has to make decisions. But he thinks the Federation is something fundamentally important to him. And I like, as Gene is saying, that is exactly the sorts of things, and that's why I say it's not dystopic, because it's never been dystopic. Even if it's dark, it's never been dystopic. It's always been the idea that there was that there was something we could grope for, something we could reach for, something that was better than us, better than what we have now. And I always like that.
That makes me think about Tilly. I feel like Tilly is also the perfect representation of the hopefulness of Trek. Now, I love Tilly. She's my favorite person on that whole show. I freaking love her. Okay. And she is the most unqualified person to be captain ever. Okay. She's an ensign. She's an ensign. And the fact that every single one of those people said, "Yay, Tilly, be our captain." Like,
Go
how
to the barn and
ridiculous
put on a
was that?
show.
It was so ridiculous. As much as you love Tilly, the fact is the captain holds the lives of every person on that crew in their hands. Okay. And I love Tilly. She doesn't have the experience, she doesn't have the temperament. Like, this is not the person that you put in charge. But even
Naval
throughout all that, when push comes to shove, she does stick to her Federation morals, right? Like, she knows that she's underqualified, and she knows we're all about. There was one episode where it was like, yeah, we're all gonna die because we got no chance. This isn't gonna happen, but we're gonna do as much as we can until we do die.
There's a strong tradition in naval fiction of putting the unqualified usually young man in charge. Hornblowers. There's all kinds of things in that genre where they do exactly that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's something that happens.
I just thought it was completely unrealistic, and I think that they did it because we love Tilly so much, and the reason we love Tilly is because she is the best of the Federation.
She's Kirk without the hubris, though.
Yeah.
Like, because that was my initial reaction to it. I was like, oh, I don't know if Tilly should be XO. Like, I love Tilly, but maybe that's not the role for her. It's a good thing Starfleet Medical has the incredible advancements they do because people are about to get hurt. But then thinking about it, it's like, well, like, if you look at Kirk's, both his canonical, like, trajectory and career path, as well as, like, the novels and all the other stuff, like, Kirk is just as inexperienced when he gets command of the Enterprise. He's just as, like, reckless. He makes mistakes. But the thing is, Kirk is, like, he's very cocksure. And so he just fakes it. Whereas Tilly's more like, look, I don't know you guys, which I feel somewhat more reassured by. Like, I'd rather have someone not know and know they don't know and be open about, like, all right, I don't know, as opposed to someone's like, no, I got this. And it's like, hey, Captain, why is the ship falling apart? Don't worry about it. I totally planned that. It's like, all right, we just lost another 500 crew members. No, this is all going to plan. I'm going to eat an apple. Don't worry about this. So I feel like Tilly is Kirk if Kirk wasn't such a POS.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us in this last hour of
Great pleasure.
celebrating 55 years of Star Trek. We got a lot of going on over on our Discord channel and other panels and discussions. Make sure you check out GPS's charity auction. You can buy some Girl Scout cookies too if you want over there. And we got other events coming up throughout this weekend. I want to thank all of you for joining for the Star Trek panel, and I hope all of you will come back next year so we can continue the Star Trek discussion and celebrate 56 years of the Star Trek universe. Thank you all so very much, and live long and prosper. Thank you, guys.